Valiant Comics Harbinger is one of my favorite comic books of all time, having introduced an amazing array of characters to the world including Peter Stanchek, Faith Herbert, Charlene Dupree, John Torkelson, and Chris Halloway. Harbinger was a concept that creator Jim Shooter had kicked around since the late 80s. The original concept always featured the character known as Peter Stanchek, named after a friend of Shooter's. The original pitch featured Peter and Toyo Harada, who was then known as Kuramoto. An early version of Peter's girlfriend Chris appeared as a character named Elaine. In this treatment, Peter develops his powers, has troubles in school, finds the ad for the Harbinger Foundation, and eventually goes to Harbinger, where he faces more troubles. It would be a couple years later in 1992 when Harbinger went from concept to comic. Then fledgling Valiant Comics superhero line was expanding from just 2 titles, the Gold Key revivals of Magnus Robot Fighter and Solar, when they launched new properties like Exo Man-O-War, Shadow Man, Archer and Armstrong, Rye, and Harbinger. 1992's Harbinger first arc drops us right in with the story already in progress. The very first image tells us much about the book. Peter's girlfriend Chris is behind the driver's seat of a car, but that car is floating above a very crowded highway. A guy named Peter is exiting the flying car, deciding to confront a helicopter that's following them. "I'll set us back down after we lose them," Peter notes. Right from page 1, we know our protagonist is a very powerful young man. Upon landing the car, Peter and Chris are attacked by more kids with superpowers. These kids have code names like Eel, Weasel, and Lump. These kids are no match for Peter, who is able to get away with Chris soon after the confrontation. They go to a hotel room where the manager refuses to give them a room until Peter instructs him to do so. The manager listens to the command. We soon learn that the Harbinger Foundation places advertisements in newspapers. That's words on paper that some guys named Hurst and Kane thought up for you kids out there. And they use these adverts to recruit kids with powers. Peter breaks into the local post office and steals some of the letters from Harbinger's P.O. box. They first visit a girl named Faith, who sent a letter to Harbinger saying that she dreams about flying. It turns out that this young girl doesn't actually have superpowers, and Peter looks in her mind and is able to tell that. Except something funny happens. Peter is actually able to activate a power within Faith. Suddenly, Faith can fly. She leaves home and decides to join Peter and Chris on their adventure. Chris is, well, she's not exactly happy to have another girl in the group. Pete quiets everyone down using his powers, and hours later, after realizing that he used his powers like this, Chris lays down an ultimatum. Use the powers like that again on her, and Chris may make Peter never wake up again. Peter is able to recruit another girl named Flamingo after a trip to tear up the local Harbinger office to steal more letters from kids and secret files. Looking through the files, Faith finds one about an inconclusive guy named John Torkelson. They visit the guy, who works at a garage, and he really hates wearing t-shirts. Peter has it in his mind that Torque somehow works for Harbinger, but when he looks into his mind, he sees the truth. Unfortunately, it activates Torque's powers, who finds that he has super strength, and that he is a little pissed off at Peter. Harbinger cronies show up in the abandoned yard where the kids are squatting. The foursome are able to defeat the armed foot soldiers, but Chris is shot and wounded in the battle. The gang steamrolls into a hospital to get Chris some medical attention, but the attendant on staff doesn't know what's going on, nor does he want to help. Peter actually mentally rips the bullets right out of Chris's body, and Dr. Hayward, seeing this, decides to help the kids as long as they calm the hell down. Using Hayward's summer home as a base, Chris recovers from her wounds. After Faith and Peter have another run-in with some Harbinger goons, the duo finds a Harbinger office with a bunch of Harbinger uniforms. A plan is then enacted for the group to travel to Harbinger's New York office and confront them. They suit up in the Harbinger uniforms, get in the car, and then fly the car to New York. They think they're going to get the jump on these Harbinger goons, but when they walk in, there's like 60 armed guys and a bunch of super-powered kids called the Egg Breakers. Harbinger's badass CEO Toyo Harada is also there, and everyone is about to find out just how much of a badass he is. So, you know what? Wait a second, because I'm going to drop some history. Harbinger issues 1 through 6 came with a coupon inside. If you bought all 6 issues and sent in those coupons, you could redeem them for a special 0 issue. This issue is now worth something like $6.9 trillion. I've never even seen one. If you didn't mail in the coupons, you could actually snag the 0 issue if you bought the first Harbinger trade paperback, though this 0 issue is worth a lot less. So here's the rub. Toyo Harada in Harbinger issue 2 introduces himself to Peter. "Hello, Peter. I'm Toyo Harada, the founder and chairman of Harbinger." Now, the 0 issue showed us the life of Peter Stanchek before flying around in the car on the first page of that first issue. Peter saw one of those Harbinger ads and wrote his story. His mom is a pain in the ass, but he is able to shut her up with his powers. Wish I had that ability when I was a kid. Now, Pete is visited by folks from Harbinger, and finally he is taken in. And then he meets Toyo Harada for the first time. "Son, my name is Toyo Harada. This is my foundation. I am a Harbinger, like you." Let me finish about the rest of the issue for a second. First, Peter's a dick to his friend Joe. Chris learns she's being controlled by Peter, that his friend Joe is murdered by Harbinger in an attempt to control Peter, and when you can't control Peter and decide to kill him, things may not end up the way you think. Things may go boom. Now, Chris decides to go off with Peter even after being mind-controlled, and that leads right into issue 1. Here's what I love. Back in 2007, quite a number of years before Valiant relaunched their universe, they started doing reprints of the classic Valiant line. Harbinger the Beginning collected the 0 issue in the first 7 issues of Harbinger with new digital coloring from Starlight Runner, props to Jeff Gomez. But when you get to this moment that reprints issue 2, there was this slight change. "Remember me, Peter? I'm Toyo Harada, the founder and chairman of Harbinger." I really thought that was pretty ingenious. They changed the word bubble so it no longer didn't make sense that Toyo was introducing himself to Peter for the first time, after Peter had already met him for the first time. So the group of kids are clearly outmatched by Toyo Harada, but through sheer perseverance and will, they continue to fight against this force and actually find themselves coming out ahead. And Peter is ready to call out Toyo, the man who may be one of the most powerful men on the entire planet. Harada, he runs. Why? Well, Sun Tzu once said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." I guess you have to pick and choose your battles. The book moves away from the battle against Toyo in the 3rd issue as the group of kids travel to meet a computer geek named Axe, who is pretty much a D-bag to these people right from the start. And one of the biggest mistakes in early Valiant history, Peter looks into Axe's mind and accidentally triggers his powers, a mistake that will haunt many Valiant heroes for years to come. Axe is able to lead the group to the forest, which turns out to be a computer forest, which turns out to be a secret ninja base for a bunch of Exo Man-of-War's ugly spider aliens. The Renegade gang counterattack and totally wreck these aliens, thus proving that the spider aliens were really Valiant's stormtroopers. They find a spaceship and decide to go in the spaceship, and then fly the spaceship into space. So the group lands the spaceship right at a secret moon base, where they are immediately taken down by sleep gas, captured by former human-turned-ugly robot plant creature thing named Rexo. Basically 8 seconds after joining this group of kids, Axe immediately decides to Benedict Arnold and join the alien team. For some reason, he decides to try and have Faith join him. She doesn't want to, and Axe calls her a stupid blimp. He's a sweet guy. The Renegades wake up, take down Axe, and take on Rexo and his group of idiotic spider alien lackeys. This of course leads to a big fight, where the Renegades actually have a hard time fighting. In this fight, it is actually Flamingo who comes to save the day. Never mess with a girl in pink. After defeating Rexo, the gang grabs Axe, flies back to Earth, and basically tosses Axe right out of the spaceship. The Renegades return to Dr. Hayward's summer home, ready to continue their summer vacation when they realize it's December. It's like nearly Christmas time. Tired of running around fighting megalomaniac superpowered CEOs, headbanger computer geek spider aliens, and Rexo, the group disbands, leaving Peter at Hayward's house alone. Flamingo goes home where Mom is too deep in prayer to talk to her. Faith goes home and at least gets Christmas presents, but she's not really happy getting a Batman action figure. As for Chris, she walks up to a house and looks in the window. If she was a guy, someone would call the cops. Realizing that it may be more fun being superheroes, the trio head back to Hayward's house, and then the foursome decide to go get Torque. Now where's Torque? Torque went back to the garage he used to work at, which is now shut down. So Torque goes to the shack where he was living and just kind of sits there? I don't know. What he doesn't know is that Axe decided to build his own super team of powered jerk-offs, and first on the list to take down is Torque. Now Torque is a big, strong dude. He can survive being hit with a bazooka, but against Axe's cronies he might not have a chance. Luckily, Peter and the gang are flying around in the freezing cold. The renegades swoop down and take on Axe and his team. Axe decides that maybe picking on Chris is more his speed, except Chris does the smart thing and kicks him in the nards. With that, the team heads back to their home and all get in the Christmas spirit. 2012 saw the return of Valiant to the comic book world with the release of all new issue 1s for X-O Man of War, Bloodshot, Archer and Armstrong, and Harbinger. This book being resurrected by writer Joshua Dysart. Surprisingly, the entire 4-issue arc takes many of its cues from the Harbinger Zero issue from the 90s. The series kicks off with Peter living on the streets. He can't control the voices of everyone all around him as they beam straight into his head. The only thing that stops the voices are drugs, which he is able to steal thanks to his powers that control people. Peter is joined on the streets by his friend Joe. He's a great guy with personality disorder and schizophrenia. So Peter comes up with the brilliant idea to go back to his hometown, and the duo decides to squat in an empty house. This was all part of Peter's plan, as he basically returned home to stalk Chris Holloway, who at first just pretends not to even know Peter. Peter decides to stalk her some more. Chris is not very happy about that, and Chris calls him out on it, when Peter decides to force her to love him. And it works. Yay, superpowers! Meanwhile, poor Joe is just messing around with pigeons when the cops show up and arrest him. He's brought down to the police station where he is met by a man named Mr. Toll, who's not a cop. Toll works for Operation Rising Spirit and basically wants to grab and bring Peter to Rising Spirit. Joe and Pete have had run-ins with Toll in the past, but poor Toll has been the victim of Peter's incredible mind wipe ability. Peter and Chris are shacked up in the abandoned house when Peter suddenly hears a voice. He goes outside to find a talking dog. And then suddenly, he's thrust into an imaginary world where Toyo Harada, the CEO of Harbinger, is waiting to speak with him. Toyo explains PSYOP powers, how they're activated, and how people like Peter are truly special, having been born activated with his gifts. Now, Pete comes back to reality as Joe shows back up at the house, happy to have been let go from Toll's clutches. Of course, Joe is an idiot, and of course, Project Rising Spirit followed Joe right back to the house, right to Peter. A full-scale invasion is launched just to capture the young man, and unfortunately, all these men with all their guns are absolutely no match for Peter. Peter tears through these foot soldiers and just shows them how powerful and dangerous he really is. After the fight, and just around the corner, Harbinger employees show up, ready to take Peter in. He breaks off his mind link with Chris, who realizes that she was being forced to love him. That pretty much sets her off her rocker. Joe just looks at his friend in awe. He can't really believe what Peter is capable of. At the Harbinger offices, we see it as kind of like a school, like Charles Xavier's school, but with a lot more discipline involved. Peter comes to realize that this place and Toyo Harada will be all about trying to have him control his powers, just like the multitude of others there that are training at Harbinger. Pete meets his guide, Hidden Moon, who starts taking him around the Foundation. Everyone is pretty much scared of Peter. Some guy comes up trying to be nice, but he's actually thinking about how disrespectful Pete is. So, Peter starts whipping his ass. The dude actually fights right back against Peter, a bit cocky at that. Then Peter shows off some absolute true power. Peter continues to train and hone his powers, but he's still pretty reckless. Toyo and his lackeys try to figure out how they can control Peter. It's not the easiest thing, and a two-part plan is put into motion. First, Toyo takes Peter into Harbinger's labs and shows Peter what it takes for them to actually activate a Psyot's powers. It is a grueling process that can give people powers or kill them. Among Peter's powers is the ability to unlock a Psyot's powers naturally. Toyo brought Peter here for a reason. He wants Peter to try to activate someone named Faith. Faith has been brought to Harbinger and isn't really quite sure what's going on. Peter walks in and tells her to go home, but Faith isn't having it. All of her life she's been made fun of for her weight, and now she might have the chance to have superpowers. She's all in, so Peter looks into her mind and tries to activate Faith. It does not go well. Not at all. It doesn't kill her, but Peter really doesn't want to ever try that again. Peter also starts seeing projections of his friend Joe, and follows the projection to some run-down building. He finds Joe. He finds Joe dead. Peter can't believe he wasn't there for his friend. His Harbinger guy tries to shoo him away, but Peter notices something from the other junkies lying around. All of their minds are wiped. Every single one. It was all a setup, and Peter knows it. If it is a setup, then they killed his friend, and Peter is not happy. There is a huge difference in storytelling between the first 4 issues of the 1992 series and the 2012 relaunch. The older Valiant series, especially those written by Jim Shooter, have a very 1960s Marvel Comics feel to it. So much plot is placed into each and every issue. Even as an issue continued from one issue to the next, these books rarely had an arc over subsequent issues. Each issue felt more complete because you didn't have to buy 4 to 6 issues to get one complete story. I do like to think that, as a medium, comic books have evolved to where each issue is usually a part of a larger interconnecting story. Most comics today follow this format. By the end of the 1992 first issue, Pete and Chris already found Faith, Flamingo, and Torque to form their team. By issue 2, they are already going up against Toyo Harada and his Goon Squad. Issue 3 has them recruiting a new member, flying into space, having their new recruit turn on them, and fighting Rexo. Issue 4 finishes the Rexo fight, flies the spaceship back to Earth, the team separates, the team reunites, and then they fight Axe again, who has already formed his own superpower squad of his own. Now the 2012 series, the focus here is mostly on Peter Stanchek, but it does cover supporting characters like Chris and Joe. But surprisingly, we also get to learn about the world of Harbinger through Toyo Harada as well, which really adds depth to what this man has been through and what he is trying to accomplish. Through 4 issues, the story goes much slower than the 1992 series, as it takes time with the plot. Pete meets Chris. They get attacked. He ditches his friends. He goes to Harbinger to train, meets Faith, and finds his friend dead. There is no reunion with Chris. Teammates Torque and Flamingo, they are nowhere to be seen. In a 3-act structure by the end of issue 4, it really has a feeling that we are only in the middle, or possibly the end of just the 2nd act. The series takes its time in introducing us to the world of Peter Stanchek, and what the world feels like through his eyes. Both series are absolutely brilliant, and truly showcase some of the best characters ever created in comic book history. Now with multiple series currently on shelves, and a movie on the horizon, there is nowhere for Harbinger to go but up. This is Irish Rican for 2 Guys, 1 Review, and I'll see you next comic.